Now that we know a little bit about the Web API, let's actually build out a Web API that talks to a database and saves and deletes videos from that database. In order to do this, I've gone ahead and created a video class. A video just has ID, title, and length properties. We're going to keep this very simple to start with. And I've also created a video DB. This derives from the Entity Framework's DB context. I've included a DB set of video, and this is everything we need to get started with the Entity Framework in version 5. This is the code-first approach to creating a database. And something else I can do with the Entity Framework version 5 is manage migrations of my database, schema migrations, and DDL statements. I'm going to open up the Package Manager console window. So first I'll search for that up here in Visual Studio, and then type the command enable migrations. So this is automatically part of an MVC4 application. When you create a new one, it adds a reference to the Entity Framework version 5, and you have these commands available in the Package Manager console. What enable migrations will do is add a migrations folder to Solution Explorer. Inside of there is a configuration class that configures the migrations for this project. I'm going to turn on automatic migrations just to keep things as easy as possible. And this also gives me a seed method. What I can do with the seed method is every time there's a schema change or when the Entity Framework first creates a database, it will invoke this method, and I can pre-populate the database with stuff that I need in there for development. So populate lookup tables. Or in this case, maybe what I want to do is just go ahead and add a few videos into the database so that there's always some videos in the database. So the way I will do that is to walk up to the DB context derived class that we have, the video DB, and say context.videos.add or update. This first expression, Lambda expression that you see here, is a way of telling the Entity Framework how to differentiate one video from another. So it's literally saying, look at the title property of the object that I'm trying to add and make sure that's not already in the database, because the seed method will run every time there's a migration. We can have multiple migrations, and I don't want duplicate instances of MVC4 in there. So I'm telling the Entity Framework, check the title. If you don't see an MVC4 record in the database, add this one, add a link record, and then context.savechanges will just make sure everything gets flushed to the database. So with that in place and everything saved and built, I'm going to type update database. And this will go out and by default and store this database that I have and run the seed method. It's going to create it on LocalDB, which is the new version of SQL Server Express here for Visual Studio 2012. And this gives us everything we need to get started. No connection strings, no other configuration necessary. And so with that in place, I can start to think about how to actually implement get all videos. And I'm thinking that every action inside of this controller will need access to the video DB. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a private field here to hold a reference to that, include the namespace for videos.models. And then let's add a constructor here that will construct an instance of that and initialize it. So I could say db equals new video db. And I'm going to set an option here that makes life a little bit easier for me later on. I'm going to turn off proxy creation. Proxy creation with the Entity Framework is really there to enable change tracking and lazy loading. But when you're in an API scenario, typically what you do is grab data from the database and then immediately serialize it and send it to the client. Or you receive data from the client and you apply it to the database immediately. There's no need to do change tracking or lazy loading inside of an API controller, and it actually simplifies things a bit if I just turn off the proxy creation. And so with that in place, what get all videos would look like, what I want it to do is actually return an IEnumerable of all the videos that are in the database. And so that's as easy as saying return db.videos, and we're finished. I can do a build, and now let's just test it out in a browser before we write the web page that consumes that. So localhost/API/videos. This will send off a GET request, and what the GET request here returns is some XML that has those two videos that we seeded the database with.